Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a bold, heavily structured policy manifesto that completely reimagines how a state functions to prevent systemic collapse. If you've ever wondered how public policy might be engineered like a literal machine to keep things stable, well, you are definitely in the right place.
We're going to explore this framework's really provocative premise, the idea that extreme wealth disparity isn't just some moral failing, but a mechanical threat. According to the source material, when the wealth gap gets too wide, it literally causes a state's economic engine to seize right up. It's a fascinating shift, moving the conversation away from just charity to pure strategic necessity.
Here's our blueprint for today. We'll cover systemic balance. Pillar 1, social safety nets. Pillar 2, progressive taxation. Pillar 3, public asset protection. And finally, rethinking leadership.
Section 1. A blueprint for systemic balance. Mitigating systemic risk through economic balance.
All right, to understand how the author proposes mitigating this risk, we have to start with the core problem, a widening wealth gap. This is usually measured by the Gini coefficient, basically a statistical tool that tracks wealth inequality within a nation. The text argues forcefully that a state that just lets its Gini coefficient expand unchecked is literally risking the destruction of its basic social contract. And without that social contract, you just can't have a functioning economy. So we're not talking about a mere byproduct of the market here. It's framed as an absolute existential threat to long-term national prosperity.
So, how exactly does the framework propose fixing this massive foundational crack? To stabilize society, the author lays out a strict, three-pillar optimization strategy. The ultimate goal here is to create what they call foundational resilience.
Moving right along, Section 2, Pillar 1, Social Safety Nets, Building the Socioeconomic Floor.
Now, this part focuses heavily on essential needs, especially things like healthcare and unemployment, and it highlights a major paradigm shift. Instead of looking at social support as just a reactive drain on the national treasury, the text suggests we have to shift toward proactive foundational resilience. Basically, the framework treats social safety nets as a macro-prudential tool. By engineering a guaranteed socioeconomic floor, the state prevents a low equilibrium trap, a situation where poverty just stifles human capital and fuels social unrest. It's designed to literally reduce volatility across the entire market.
The author really emphasizes this point using this original Dutch phrase from the text, "een vangnet voor de armeren/wekkeren." That translates to a safety net for the poorer and weaker. Now, this isn't pitched as a handout. Rather, the text frames it as establishing an absolutely non-negotiable baseline of consumption and participation, something that entirely insulates the most vulnerable from absolute deprivation. And to back this up philosophically, the author uses a great family analogy. The text argues that, just as parents naturally support their children regardless of the kids' specific qualities or talents, society needs to operate the exact same way. The smarter, wealthier, or older citizens must bear the moral burden for the collective whole. It is a really powerful way to reframe the obligations of wealth. But how is this foundational floor actually engineered and funded?
Section 3 brings us to Pillar 2, progressive taxation, suppressing wealth concentration.
Here, the framework gives a stark warning. Without progressive taxation, excessive wealth leads directly to regulatory capture. That's when private interests subvert market dynamics just to concentrate political power. In the author's view, this completely erodes the state's social, democratic, and economic functions. So progressive taxation is positioned as the primary instrument of social engineering to actively prevent this from happening.
To actually manage this, the text lays out some specific mechanisms. For the high-income tier, the mandate is a higher proportion of revenue, with the clear objective of Gini suppression using mechanisms like wealth surtaxes on non-productive assets. Meanwhile, for the low-income tier, the focus completely shifts to preserving purchasing power through zero-rated basic income. Now, why does this matter to us? Because the text argues that capital simply has to circulate rather than stagnate to keep the everyday economy going. If wealth is just hoarded at the top, it triggers a literal market failure of liquidity. The economic machine just grinds to a halt.
But of course, that raises a pretty massive question, right? Does setting up an equitable state structured this heavily mean completely abandoning the free market? Let's see how the framework addresses that.
Section 4 covers Pillar 3, Public Asset Protection, Safeguarding Essential Services.
The framework is incredibly clear on this point, stating, "Wat voor iedereen van belang is, mag niet geprivatiseerd worden." That translates to, what is of importance to everyone must not be privatized. The text insists on the absolute non-privatization of essentials. Think things like your core infrastructure and utilities. These absolutely must remain under public stewardship to prevent any monopolistic extraction.
So the really crucial takeaway here is the decoupling of market dynamics from private ownership. The author argues that the state is often way better positioned to manage essential infrastructure because its success is measured by actual service reliability and public benefit, not just short-term shareholder dividends. And the text notes that market forces, like competition and efficiency, can absolutely still exist within a public framework. It completely challenges the idea that superior governance naturally requires private interest, which perfectly brings us to how this entire system is supposed to be managed.
Section 5. Rethinking Leadership and Governance, the Collective Intelligence Framework.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The text completely dismantles the traditional corporate governance model. Instead of relying on a single, highly paid executive who, let's face it, might be more focused on their next yacht than public service, the author proposes a governance team, specifically 3 recent graduates paired up with 3 experienced advisors. The framework argues this team is cheaper, far less greedy, brings fresh academic rigor, and is totally free from industry capture. And importantly, it relies on hard data rather than outdated experience, which drastically reduces what we call key man risk.
The text really doesn't pull any punches here, boldly stating IDIDA CEO is moeiteloos vervangbaar and probably overpaid, meaning every CEO is effortlessly replaceable. This CEO replaceability thesis shatters the popular myth of the indispensable executive superstar. The framework basically views high-level executives as easily swappable components of a much larger system. It argues that systemic outcomes are driven by organizational structure, not individual charisma.
To summarize this entire blueprint, you can think of these 3 steps operating like interconnected gears in a giant engine. First, progressive taxes fund the state and suppress excessive wealth. Second, those funds create robust safety nets that stabilize society and maintain market demand. And third, collective governance ensures that essential public goods are protected and managed strictly for the collective benefit rather than for executive gain. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought, straight from the underlying philosophy of the text. If national prosperity is truly a collective achievement, is prioritizing systemic equilibrium over individual accumulation the only viable path to enduring health? It's a framework that seriously challenges deeply held assumptions about wealth, governance, and the very role of the state. Thanks so much for joining me to explore this fascinating blueprint. Keep questioning the structures around you, and I will see you in the next explainer.